Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you like this video. It was made possible by donations from our supporters. If you're one of them, thank you so very, very much. If you're new to MBT and find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for being here today. Today, I'd like us to talk about imagination, creativity, and consciousness. Now, from your MBT science and philosophy viewpoint, you often speak of the qualities of our consciousness. Could you define qualities as in your MBT theory?
What the qualities of consciousness? Sure. Now, I define consciousness as awareness with a choice. Okay, that's my definition of awareness. And of course, that choice has to be a free will choice because that's the only kind of choice there is. If you have determinism, then there is no choice at all. So free will means that you have a choice. So awareness with a choice. And that's simply what consciousness is. Now, so what are the attributes of that awareness? Okay. The attributes of that awareness are that you, have to be aware. That means you have to have data input, right? That's what awareness is. Awareness of your environment, awareness of yourself. You get that through information, comes to you. That's awareness. Now, that's not really enough. You have to not only be aware of that information, but you have to be able to operate on it. In other words, you have to look at that information and decide, what does it mean to you? What should you do with it? And in order to do that, you have to have a purpose. Okay, so that's the next ingredient. You have to have a purpose. If you have no purpose, then information doesn't really mean anything. It's just information, but there's no like good information, which is what takes you closer to your purpose, and bad information, which takes you further away from your purpose. There's just information, and none of it has any significance without a purpose to define the arrow, the direction of the arrow from, toward good, toward beneficial, toward this information is helping me out. It's positive as opposed to negative. Okay, now in consciousness, that purpose is to lower the entropy of the consciousness. And what that equates to is, and this will seem like maybe a big logic jump to some, but we could spend 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour, pulling up the logic, but it is really just a deductive logic that lowering the entropy of the consciousness means cooperation, caring, consideration. It's other-centered, not self-centered. Okay, that's what that low entropy means. A low entropy consciousness is one that is caring and cooperative, sharing about other. Okay, so if that's where consciousness is evolving. And I guess I should tell people, in case they're not really too technical, is that entropy is a measure of disorder. So if we're talking about information and the information is at its highest entropy, that means all the bits in that information system are random. If all the bits are random, then there is no information. But if you order a few of those bits into a pattern or something, that you can point at, say, that's my little ordered set of bits, that is then information. Okay, and if you give those ordered bits some kind of a meaning, they symbolize something, or they're a metaphor for something, or you're just counting them, whatever. You can order them. Oh, here's two that I'll stack. This bit on top of that bit. Now I got two stacked, 1, 2. Now I stack another one on there. Oh, I got 3. Well, you can learn to count. You can teach yourself math. See, that's taking random things and ordering them. Okay. So information is the key idea because that's the key thing for awareness. But the awareness has to have a goal, a purpose, so it knows what positive is as opposed to negative. It has to have memory. That awareness needs memory because if there's no memory, then every awareness is your first awareness. If you don't have any memory, then you don't have a way to make assessments on whether or not you're moving towards your purpose or moving away from it. So you need memory in order to make that assessment. Okay, so these are the attributes of consciousness. Needs memory, needs purpose. It is awareness. It takes data in, and then it operates on that data and decides what to do with it. What does it mean? And how can I use that to move more toward my purpose? And how can I use that to not move any closer to the opposite of my purpose? So that is, or those are the attributes of consciousness. See, that's not very complicated. It's not a real deep, complicated thing. That just is awareness with a choice. See, the choice implies it's going to operate on the information, which implies memory, which implies purpose. You see, they're all of those things have to work together. So those are the attributes of consciousness. Now you can have consciousness in a lot of different capacities and capabilities. So human consciousness is different, say, than a dog's consciousness, which is different than, a bumblebee's consciousness. So consciousness can exist at different levels, but it all is basically the same kind of thing. It's just a matter of capacity and capability. But the fundamentals of it, no matter where it is, are basically the same. So does that answer your question about attributes
It
of
does.
consciousness?
And I was wondering, we're going to tie it into creativity. So the example I have is we often admire and honor those people throughout our history who have contributed much to humanity through their unique combination of qualities. Leonardo da Vinci is a prime example of a person producing prolific contributions through his many talents in almost every aspect of art and science. Now, as a young child, Leonardo was set free from the confines of standard education. He was encouraged to roam freely through nature, to observe and discover. He had a natural curiosity as to how things worked. Later in life, his concepts were so advanced that they were not able to be built and tested out in his own time. Only recently has it been possible to build and test some of his ideas, resulting in positive working results. How many factors might have been the impetus for this kind of creative genius? And does it have to do with this accumulation of qualities that the consciousness has?
Well, yes, it definitely does. First, let's just talk about his education, how that contributed. Okay. We, particularly in the West, we associate education with learning facts. If you know a whole bunch of facts, then you're well educated. And if those facts cover a lot of different subjects, then you're very well educated. But knowing facts is not what thinking is all about. It is what memory is about. Okay, that requires memory. But that's about all it requires. So that's one facet of your consciousness is used there, and that's memory. So you can go retrieve these facts. And fortunately for Leonardo, he didn't have to go that route, because what that does is that tends to increase the, what can we say, the amount of value that we place on an intellect. Okay, facts are intellectual. That's the intellectual part of our self. So you can be brilliant in terms of knowing facts. You've memorized every page of an encyclopedia, and you know all of those facts. So in conversation, boy, you just know things about everything, and you just sound like you're just as smart as you can be. But that's all intellectual. And that intellectual part of us has very little to do with creativity, has very little to do with quality of consciousness, with lowering the entropy of consciousness. It's good to have a well-educated intellect. That's a good thing. It enables us to understand things better. If we have that, we can see how all the piece parts fit together. So it's an important thing. I don't mean to diminish the intellect as not being important. It is important, but it's not where creativity comes from. If it was, then we'd have a whole lot more creative people, because we in the West are very big on intellect, and we're very small on intuition, which is the other side of that coin. You have intellect on one side, you have intuition on the other. The intuitive side does not work with facts. It's not fact-based. It comes to its understanding holistically. It swallows big chunks of understanding. It doesn't look, if we look at reading a book, it's not like it's reading a book collecting facts. It's just all of a sudden, in 1 microsecond, understands what's in that book or what's on that page. And it doesn't understand it in a way that would be like it studied it. It understands it in a way of it just knows it. You see, the intuition is non-intellectual, and it just occurs. You often hear people saying, well, I had a bolt out of the blue, and I had an aha moment. Well, that's because when you have these moments of inspiration and knowing that come out of the intuition, it's not because, I read it in a book, or I finally found the right book that, told me how to think about it. It's not like that, though thinking intellectually helps. It's more of finally all the pieces in your mind someplace, but not in your intellect, all fall together and make sense. And then bingo, you've got understanding that you didn't have before. Before, you just had a whole collection of facts. But that understanding of what did those facts mean? What's the big picture, around those facts? The intellect can pick that little picture of those facts and what they mean apart in lots and lots of detail. But to get the big picture of what it means, what its connection is, that requires intuition. So, he had an advantage in not going through the normal education system. That was good. He got out and just could open his mind and wonder. Well, he was obviously a very intelligent person. All chunks of consciousness aren't equally intelligent. They come, like I say, in all various shapes of capacity and capability. So he was a very intelligent person, which means when he saw things out in nature, he had a mind that wanted to know, why are they like that? How did they get that way? Why do they do the things they do? So he was constantly, that's just his approach to life was how do things work and why do they work that way?
Curiosity.
Curiosity. Yes, that's a big piece of it. You have to be curious. And the other part that you need to be is open. On the intuitive side, openness is essential. And what that means, openness means you don't have biases. You see, if you have biases, you think things are going to have to be this way. Well, then you refuse to see anything other than things that are that way. Your biases are beliefs, and those beliefs push out everything that's crosswise to those beliefs. It refuses to look at them. So that is a big limitation because usually those aha moments aren't because your belief fell into place. It's because of a lot of things that you had no idea how they connect suddenly connected and came up with a big picture, a whole picture. So if we're talking about creativity, then that belongs not 100%, but probably about 80% over on the intuitive side. Now, the other 20% is on the intellectual side, because unless you have enough facts, unless you have enough, understand enough things, well, then the intuition doesn't have much to work with. So the facts create all the puzzle pieces, and the intuition puts all those pieces together into a big picture. So you need both. But the actual creativity part, that spark of genius that let him come up with things, all that came from the intuitive side. He didn't just intellectually think those things up. He thought about them. He was able to put his mind into a calm, clear space where he was open to the possibilities for the answers. And when you can do that, the answers come. Oh, look at that, a flying machine. Oh, look at that, and you can see all these things. And you don't necessarily know the details of how they work. See, that comes back into the intellect. The intellect needs to go build it. Well, the intellect probably doesn't know how to build it, but the intuition knows that that thing would work. That thing, will function. So you draw and you make notes like he did, and you say, here's my idea. But he didn't know really that it would work or not, and he didn't have the intellectual material he needed to go put one together, in his basement laboratory, or whatever, So that's why you have this brilliant man who not only was good at engineering, not only good at inventing, but he also was a brilliant artist. He was a brilliant artist, but it's the same sort of thing. Art is a creative process. If art was only getting the right color at the right place, then you could teach a computer to do art better than a human. You see, but it's not. Good art is an intuitive process. That's why it's a creative process. And the art that you look at and says, oh, that's nice. And the art that you look at and says, wow, he really captured that emotion on that face. Now, the emotion on that face had maybe, it's just a slightest bit of shadow here, a slightest bit of touch there. I mean, it's really, really subtle to get that. And you have to use your intuition to put it just the way it feels right, not your intellect to say, well, we need a little piece of shadow there and we need something over here. See, that's the intellect trying to build it. But the intellect doesn't make that picture, doesn't make the Mona Lisa with that little, half smile on her face that is so famous. But your intuition does. It knows how to do that. And you don't do it by thinking about it. You do it and your hand just moves and it just is right when you're done. So that's the way it is with intuition. You don't do it purposefully so much as you let your intuition guide the process. And then later you step back and look at it and see whether or not that's what you want or whether you want to continue. But it's a different process.
When I try to delve into some more ideas, I ran across an article by Michael Michalko, and his paper is Creative Thinking in Leonardo da Vinci. He describes da Vinci's thought process as connecting the unconnected. Michalko says of the process, forcing the connection between two totally unrelated subjects moved his imagination with a vengeance. And he gave an example that was really interesting because it's a NASA engineer. If you remember the Hubble telescope, it was at first not a successful venture.
Mm-hmm.
And the engineer, James Crocker, um, was thinking in the shower and noticed while showering, absent-mindedly looked at the adjustable shower head and saw that it could be extended and adjusted in various ways to the user's height. He made the connection between the shower head and the Hubble problem and invented the idea of placing corrective mirrors on automated adjustable arms that could reach inside the telescope and adjust to the correct position. His idea turned the Hubble from a disaster into a NASA triumph. And he goes on to say it is not possible to think unpredictably by looking harder and longer in the same direction. So this was kind of Da Vinci's thought process. One of the
Hmm.
factors of his prolific imagination are the factors that contribute to imagination, creativity, and observational skills able to be developed by the everyday individual. Well, that question from the big picture of ideas of Da Vinci, let us look at the creative individuals of modern times in a specific genre. One that came to mind was John Cleese. He's a prolific British writer and comedian, and he just wrote a book called Creativity. He studied law at Cambridge and has said of the intellect, as you have just said, it's helpful for logic, analysis, and verbal communication. But what he calls the unconscious mind, and I think you would call unconscious mind a different term, you would call it
Intuitive mind.
intuitive mind, is abundantly more powerful than the intellect, as you've just stated. Cleese states that in creativity, there are no mistakes. The worry of mistakes is a product of the intellect. He
Hmm.
feels anyone can learn to be creative. He says, play, put in the work, and then listen to how it develops in a while. He stressed the importance of play, and that reminds me of your Tom's Park. I mean, he cited Feynman's bongo drum playing and Cambridge mathematician John Conway's love of playing games, game of life. Feynman was
Hmm.
was also encouraged by his father to explore and challenge orthodox thinking. I think encouragement and support is a huge thing here. Of
Hmm.
course, we admire the stellar examples of these attributes of creativity in famous people, but what about everyday people? How can tapping into this thing we call intuition, led by imagination or unconscious mind, as you call intuitive mind, help people in their lives?
All right. First, a couple of things from that I'd want to make is that you cannot force the process. The creative process has to happen. You have to get out of the way and let it happen. If you try to force it, it won't work. It, it is difficult. And what I mean by forcing it is another way of saying it can't be an intellectual process. There's no recipe you can follow or directions you can follow, and then bang, you're creative if you do these things. It's not like that. You can't force it. You have to let it happen. There are people who are good at letting it happen and people who are terrible at letting it happen. Now, those of us who go through the normal educational process and we are taught to be intellectual and we are taught that the intuition, we call it like a gut hunch, that's our intuition. Well, that's that is kind of a slur that the intellect has about the intuition. It's nothing more than a guess. It's not real. It's just if we spend all our time in the intellect, and if our school has taught us that the intellect is the real thing, and that the intuition is kind of a weak player, oh, yeah, I have this gut hunch that such and such is going to happen. Well, it might happen, it might not. It's just guessing, and it doesn't really have any force. And so the intuitive side of our consciousness is belittled and made slight of. So we mostly don't try to develop it. And we spend all our time developing our intellectual side. Now, the people who do that are pretty common because that's the way our education system is. That's the way our culture, sees things. So what you have then is a whole lot of people who are locked into their intellect. They live their lives through their intellect. Sometimes people say they live it, they live their life out of their head. Everything that they do is thought of first. What is the best move I should make? Now what should I do? How should I interpret that? How should I judge that? All that's intellectual stuff. And though, as I say, that's helpful, that's not where creativity is. That's not where intuition is. They're in a separate place. To access them, you have to let go. You have to relax. You have to tell your intellect to just sit down and be quiet and be open and see what happens. Now, most people can't do that. So we've come to the point in our culture that creativity is just something that a very few people have. It's one of these great talents that just a few people seem like they can do it, and most people are not all that creative. Well, that's because of our culture. It's the way we teach people. It's the way we think. It's our beliefs about consciousness and what's important and what's not. And we tend to belittle the intuitive side to the point that nobody develops it. Now, just think that, the average person in our culture spends a lifetime developing and honing and polishing and studying their intellectual side. You start in kindergarten, you learn the ABCs, that's intellectual. You learn how to write and read, and all of that's intellectual capacity. So we spend years and years and years, almost our whole lives, honing and improving that. And we spend almost no time at all honing and improving and developing our intuition. So think what we would be like if we spent no time at all developing our intellect. Then we'd be like the boy who was raised by wolves, that old kind of literature theme, where you have somebody who was never put in school, never taught to use their intellect. So instead, they learned to do things that the wolves do. They became more intuitive, but they didn't have language. They had probably grunt and gesture kind of language, but they didn't have a lot of the skills that the people who developed their intellect. So think that if we never developed our intellect, what would we be like? We'd be like a bunch of mumbling idiots. We wouldn't be able to think our way out of a wet sack. Well, that's the way we are with our intuition, because we never spent any time developing that. We can't create our way out of a wet sack. We are just hopeless and helpless when it comes to doing intuitive things, except some people have learned that intuition sometimes gives them the answers they can't get any other way. You talked about the engineer who was in the shower, right? Well, you're in the shower, you're relaxed, you let your mind go, and then poof, here comes the answer, And there are all sorts of stories about scientists and engineers and mathematicians all having that aha moment at a time when they were relaxed. They had almost fallen asleep. They were just on the edge of sleep, and then voila, there it comes. Or in the morning, they just woke up and were drowsy, and there it comes. Or they're sitting on a toilet, that's where it comes. Or they're in the shower, or they've given up at the office and they go out and they're just sitting down and watching people pass by on the street, or they go get in a canoe and take a paddle, up the river, and bang, there's the answer. It's because if you keep pushing at it and trying to get it intellectually, you inhibit the process of intuition and make it impossible. So all of these people that have these intuitive breakthroughs, it's because they found a way to just relax let go, open their minds to whatever comes there. Now, whatever comes there, they'll need their intellect to assess it and see how valuable it is. Yes, intellect's necessary, but that's the intuitive side. And yes, everybody can do it. Every human can develop their intuitive side, just like every human can develop their intellectual side. It's just that we don't choose to. So we would be called a very left brain culture because we're mostly intellectual, and right brain is mostly intuitive. So that's the difference. So yes, everyone can do it. Everyone can get good at it if they practiced it. But the people who do practice it, that do get good at it, then they can do a lot of marvelous things. They have insights. They see bigger pictures. Where everybody else is stumbling around with a bunch of puzzle pieces, they'll look at it and, oh, the solution to that puzzle. How do all those puzzle pieces fit together? And what does it mean? You see, that's what I mean by the bigger picture. The little picture, the intellect gathers all the facts, but to make those facts tell a bigger story of meaning and consequence and where this leads and its significance, then that's where the intuition is good, because those kinds of things aren't fact-based. Those kinds of things are understanding-based. And the intuitive side of consciousness is where that comes from. And another thing, while we're mentioning it, is all the things that are paranormal, like lucid dreaming, like remote viewing, like out of body, all of those things all reside on the intuitive side. Nobody has ever had an experience of the paranormal through their intellect. That's not how it comes. But people learn to pop out of their intellectual mode into their intuitive mode, get some information, and pop right back. And eventually you can learn to do that in fractions of seconds, where you can just pop into that intuitive mode, gather some information, pop back, and the intuition then becomes an everyday part of your life, something you develop. So it's not like it's an either or, like you have to be in intuitive mode or you have to be in intellectual mode. You can jump back and forth between them if you practice enough and if you develop that intuitive side enough, and then you have both sides working together, with the intellect doing what it can do and the intuitive side doing what it can do. And between the two of them, you have a whole mind, not just half a mind. And that is then where we mostly would like to be. Somebody who has a lot of facts that they can work with and a lot of intuition that collects information that is beyond facts.
I think what you were suggesting was that play, give it a while, listen, pay attention. I think the idea of
Well,
play is at the core of the game you've invented called Tom's Park. Would you say your excitement, enthusiasm for this project is the potential it carries for unlocking the intuition so necessary for accessing that more abundantly powerful information?
yes, absolutely. I had tried over many times. There's a group of people that have come to many of my lectures and courses and so on, and they're very stuck in their intellects, and they have a really hard time with meditation. See, meditation is a training tool to help you get out of your intellect. The idea of meditation is just to be without thinking. Well, without thinking means without intellect. Just keep that intellect quiet, just be, as opposed to grinding on facts, just be. And that's difficult for intellectual people because they'll sit there and say, all right, I'm just going to be. Am I doing it right? Has this been long enough? Their intellect is constantly analyzing what it is they're doing. Oh, what was that? I saw a little flash of light. I wonder what that was. Well, it was probably just my eyeball had a flick of neurons or something. And constantly their mind is over here churning on assessing, judging, evaluating, and analyzing every second of them not thinking. Well, they're thinking all the time. So they have this problem of can't get outside their intellect. And I'd worked with them, some of them over years, and they were just kind of stuck there. So I thought, instead of going the way of meditation, let's try a different way, which will get you there just as well. But it's kind of it's a clever way that doesn't require you to be able to meditate. It just requires that you can daydream. It requires that you have imagination. Because now here's the connection between the two. Imagination can be both. An imagination can be intellectual. I can imagine me talking to Susie, and Susie and I are having this imagined conversation, and I'm saying what I make up what I say, and then I make up what Susie says, and then I make up what I say, and then I make up Susie's reply to that. In other words, my intellect is playing both parts, playing all the parts. Or I can also have my imagination, have an interaction with Susie, and I don't make up her part. I just let her part happen. I just say what I'm saying to Susie and just open and see what Susie says back. So you can do it either way when you're doing imagination. You can let the thing that you're imagining kind of take on a life of its own and just let the data flow naturally from that. Now, almost everybody has done that in a daydream. Almost everybody has daydreamed about something or another, and then you kind of get lost in that daydream, and the daydream just goes on, and one thing leads to another, action happens, things get done, interactions take place, and it wasn't you playing both parts. You just let that daydream kind of unwind the way it did. Okay, you started out playing both parts. The first 3 minutes or 4 minutes of the daydream, you played both parts. And then the more into it you got, the more connected to it that you became, the less you play both parts. So if you really get into it, and by getting into it, that means emotionally, that means sensually, in the sense that all senses, you want to smell it, you want to taste it, you want to feel it, you want to hear it. Don't just have like a conversation with Susie. That's just audio and maybe some visual if you see her face. But have experiences that have lots of things for all your senses. Focus on all your senses. If you're at the beach, you smell the salt water, you hear the birds, you hear the surf, you feel the sand in your feet. The more engrossed you get into it, then the less your intellect can provide all that. Your intellect gets overwhelmed, with all that sense data all going on all at the same time. And eventually your intellect just sits down and lets that play however it plays. Well, that then has switched from intellect over to intuitive side. So now you've done the same thing that meditation teaches you to do, is to let go of intellect and get into your intuitive side. Or my other name for that, of the intuitive side, is being level. Now you're just being, right? You're open and you're being. Anyhow, it's the same trip, whether you do it through meditation or whether you do it through imagination. You end up in the same place. So now you have to learn how to take that imagination and practice with it. Practice with it for anything you can remember. Go back in your imagination and redo it. You remember when you were a kid, you went to the beach with your family. Go back, do that. Then return to that same beach as an adult and see the difference in perspective, different kinds of things you notice and so on. And, you practice with it to the point that it's easy to imagine things. You've got a good imagination. Now, the people who've been trapped in their intellects all their lives will have to work a little at that imagination. It's going to not be that easy for them because they have a very undeveloped, unsophisticated, ignorant, intuitive side. And they're going to have to exercise it a bit. But it doesn't take too long before that ability to imagine starts to get pretty good. And you can get into that imagination and just lose yourself in it, and let the story unwind. And when you can do that, now you can use that to solve problems. Not just necessarily walk down the beach, but that big problem you're having at work that you can't quite solve that equation, or you can't quite get this to work, or you can't make that connection. You can let that just kind of float through your mind, not with the intellect. Not the intellect says, all right, now what are the steps to solve that problem? Because that's what you're trying to avoid. That won't work. You've tried that, doesn't work. Now you need a big picture, not a little picture. And if you can just open your mind and let that flow, and you have a good imagination, well, it'll work. That's when the aha moments will come. You will be in that intuitive state. You'll be able to remote view. You'll be able to travel around in consciousness and see different reality frames. All that stuff will come to you, and then you have to check it out and see, was it helpful? Did that aha moment actually give you a solution? When you were out traveling around in consciousness, did you see things that were evidential, things that you could then check to see if they were right? When you were remote viewing, did you get the right picture? And what you'll find is that when you are lost in that intuitive thought, your intuitive mind can take over with its, not with judging, not with analysis, but with direction. See, your intuitive mind can also think. You can think from that intuitive space. It's not just your intellect that can think, and your intuitive mind just doesn't think. You can think, but you can't judge and analyze. You see, that's what you can't do. You can't operate on it. You just have to be open and direct yourself. Oh, all right, now that I'm here in this daydream, what about that puzzle I was trying to solve? What about that, the solution to that problem? Where is this going to take me? If I make this choice instead of that choice, where is that going to lead in 5 years, 10 years from now? See, those are things that logic can't help you with, but the intuition can give you some really good answers for questions like that.
This is the value of imagination and developing creativity that you were so excited about, the way you developed your process in Tom's Park.
Yeah. So see, Tom's Park starts with a lot of outside physical things to do. That's where you start. That's where you learn to develop your intuitive side. You learn to develop your imagination. So you go there, and all the animals that are around, they all speak, and you can have a chat with a squirrel or with a deer, and you can go hiking, and you can go camping, and you can ride horses, and you can go swimming and snorkeling and scuba diving, and drive your little jet ski boat around. So there's all sorts of things to do there that are attractive as far as getting evolved in them emotionally, as well as all 5 senses get involved in them. So you play in the park like that, and talking to people, lots of people in the park. So the interaction with other people, the interaction with all this going on, all the nature, all the things to do, wonderful restaurants, it's just lots of things going on there. Libraries, like movie houses, you can go in there in a special travel agency for taking trips places. So anyway, so there's all these things to do, but there's then also places to launch to remote view, or to go out of body, or to make connections with other people telepathically. So there's that part of it's there too. So that's the idea. You start with your intellect having a good time on a jet ski, but eventually you get so involved in that jet ski and what's going on, because there's some, what is it? It's a big giant squid that's in that lake that is attracted to jet ski boats and other things. So, you have these interactions, and you get so involved in that you forget that this is your imagination. You just get into the space. And then you realize that while you're just into that space, you can go anywhere, do anything. Your mind is open. And yes, you can see what's likely to happen in the next 5 or 10 years if you do A instead of B. That sort of intuitive information comes. But then you have to, eventually, you do have to judge it. You don't judge it while you're in the intuitive space. If you try to judge it there, bang, you'll blow it apart Intuition's gone. Now you're intellect. Intellect will chase that intuition away. The way you work with both of them is to jump back and forth between them, sample both. They are kind of incompatible with each other. As soon as the intellect comes in, the intuition's gone. Okay, so it's a matter of practice. And with the Tom's Park idea, no, you don't have to meditate. You just have to learn to play. See, playing is a relaxing thing. Playing, you kind of open your mind up and just be. And when you're just there having fun, doing silly conversations with some nutty squirrel, then when you're relaxed like that, then all sorts of possibilities in the intuitive side will come about. And then that intuitive side can say, well, while I'm here, after I finish with this squirrel, I'm going to go just fly up in the air and take a look around Tom's Park from the air and see what's there. And then you do that with your imagination. And then pretty soon you're flying over your neighborhood and looking around what's going on in your neighborhood today. And you may see things in your neighborhood that are evidential. Oh, look, there's a big concrete truck parked in neighbors 4 doors down. They must be pouring a new driveway. And then when you come back, you go out and you look out the window and you see if the concrete truck's there. See, that's evidence. So you have to collect evidence. Otherwise, you'll never know whether the information you get is coming from outside of you and is actual, real, accurate information, or whether it's just stuff that you are coming up with out of your own mind. And it's not, there's no concrete truck there, So with probing and experimenting, you'll eventually have enough evidential data that your intuitive side will start getting very strong, because you'll gain confidence every time you go out of your house and there's that concrete truck you saw. Okay, I know how that felt. I can reproduce that. I can do that more. And 5 or 10 years later, you're good at it. Now you're like you're like those inventors and those scientists and those amazing people like Leonardo da Vinci. You can jump into that intuitive side whenever you want to.
And you can be more creative.
You can be more creative about all your life.
Does a larger consciousness system benefit from us using imagination and creativity? Does it help it evolve?
Well, sure. It helps you understand. It helps you see bigger pictures. Evolving has to do with changing at the being level, changing who you are at the being level, becoming more caring, more cooperative, becoming love. That's what we're here to do. That's our purpose. That's lowering entropy of our consciousness or increasing the quality of our consciousness. And that intuition can give you answers, can give you direction, can give you insight into that the intellect just can't produce. The intellect wants to do everything from a logical perspective. The intuition is not logical. The intuition just gives you information. And like I say, if you don't develop that intuition, well, then it doesn't know much. It can't do much. It just sits there and it's your gut hunch that is often wrong as it is right, and it's not helpful. But if you develop it, like I've just described, over years, develop it, take data, do things evidential, build confidence, then your ability to change who you are, to see who you are, to even recognize what the authentic you is. See, most intellectuals, if you said, well, what is the authentic you? And what's your image? How much of you is really image, you being the way you think you should be, like you were taught how to be polite by your mother, and you act polite, but are you really polite? Are you really kind? Or are you just acting polite and acting kind? Well, if you tell that to someone trapped in their intellect, they won't know. They won't have any idea what the real self, at the being level, who they are. What's inside, what's under the hood, and they'll have no clue. And that's the big part of growing up, is getting a clue about that, what's under the hood, not just living through your image, which is what most of us do in Western culture. We live through an image. We do things that we think we're required to do, we should do, everybody else does, but not because that's really us, that we're expressing ourselves. See, that's a different thing than doing things because your intellect says these are the things you should do. All right, so I'll do that. I'll be nice because my intellect learned in grade school that you don't grab the toys away from Sally because make Sally cry and then you get in trouble. You learn to share. Okay, so now you're a grown up and you're sharing. Good for you. But does that mean that sharing is a quality you own, or is it just part of your image, what you do because you've learned that that works better? You can get along better with people, so you do those things. But is it really you? Are you a kind person? Are you a giving person or not?
So
Well,
getting in touch with our intuition will allow us to be more in touch with our authentic self. I
exactly.
think that's one
And
of
then
the
you,
potentials of it.
yeah, then you can grow. Because if you have no idea what your authentic self is, it's really hard changing it to be anything else or to find, how it could be better.
Yeah.
So this intuition will help someone tremendously with their, say, relationships. Now, are relationships important in your life? Well, yeah, they're more important probably than anything else in your life. Your relationships with, your spouse, your relationships with your boss, your relationships with everyone, your significant other, I guess, is the key one, but relationships with your children, with your parents, all these relationships are very important for us. And the intellect can tell you precious little about any of them. Oh, we think it tells us about them, but it tells us very, very little about them. Now, your intuition can tell you so much more. You can understand why other people are the way they are, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're going through, what they meant by that last phrase they said. Because your intellect can't know any of that stuff. Your intellect just looks at logic, and logic doesn't have enough information to produce those kinds of results, but the intuition does. So suddenly all your relationships get better. So not only can you paint ceilings like the Sistine Chapel and make up flying machines and other kinds of things, but you start to have much better relationships with other people because you can appreciate them so much better from an intuitive space than you can from an intellectual space.
And that's a real value,
yeah,
Tom. Thank you so much. This has been really fun and really interesting. And I hope it helps several people. Give Tom Spark a go. It's a way to develop intuition, and who knows?
it's a lot of fun, and you'll be surprised all the interesting things you'll learn while you're there.
Thank you so much.
I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We will continue to post videos for free on my YouTube channel, but please understand, these videos are expensive to produce. They represent many thousands of hours of production and editing, as well as all the necessary audiovisual equipment, computers, and software. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. It would be very much appreciated. The links are in the description below. Thank you.